Torches are moving across the water. Aegean Sea, 1537. They are not signals. They are Ottoman corsairs under high red in Barbarossa, and every island they touch tonight will wake up missing children. You are 12 years old on the island of Paros. You are asleep when the door comes off its hinges. Cecilia Venier-Baffo is erased. The Ottoman Empire's buried architecture of erasure is the kind of history you want more of. Subscribe. The registers go deeper than anyone has shown you. Below deck, the air is urine, salt, and the sound of girls trying not to exist. Barbarossa's 1537 Aegean campaign seized between 12,000 and 15,000 captives across Corfu, Paros, Naxos, and Kythera. It was not war, it was procurement. Girls between 10 and 14 were separated at the point of boarding, not randomly, not incidentally. They had a specific destination and a specific price. At the Constantinople slave markets, a young Christian girl of demonstrable noble blood sold for between 5,100 and 3,000 acti, more than a war horse, more than a trained male labourer. The price reflected what the buyer intended to do with her, and the buyer, ultimately, was the Ottoman state. The galley docked at the Golden Horn. You were taken off and handed to palace physicians, teeth examined, eyes examined, hands examined for softness. Softness meant noble origin, which meant premium placement. You were washed, dressed in Ottoman garments. Your cross was lifted from your neck without ceremony, the way you'd remove a wrong label from a document before filing it correctly. Your hair was rebraided. A palace eunuch stood in front of you and stated a word, Nurbanu, Queen of Light. You were not asked. Register clerk entered the name in ink. Stipend 3 akshay, rank asimi, quarters assigned. No column existed for former identity. The ledger had no use for Cecilia, but here is what that ledger concealed behind its clean columns. The harem was not a seraglio, it was not a pleasure palace. Every painting you have ever seen of it, Ingres, Jerome, 100 European artists depicting languid women in marble baths, was painted by men who had never been inside one and were never permitted near it. Those paintings were not descriptions, they were a cover story. The Ottoman Imperial Harem was a conversion institution with a documented bureaucratic architecture, a ranked salary structure, and a designed psychological conditioning process, and it had been running for over a century before Cecilia arrived on that galley. The harem was the female devshirme. The devshirme kidnapped Christian boys from the Balkans, converted them, trained them, and produced janissary commanders and grand viziers of absolute loyalty. The harem ran the identical logic on girls. Take a child with no Ottoman roots. Remove every prior attachment, language, religion, name, family, God. Install replacements. Then watch as that child becomes more loyal to the empire than anyone born inside it, because she has been made to understand, without anyone saying it directly, that the life before is gone, and the life ahead is entirely conditional on her performance inside these walls. Cecilia had just been enrolled in that program. She did not know yet what the graduation requirements were. The first thing the harem took was sleep, not as punishment, as architecture. The Asimi, novice, schedule began before dawn with Quran recitation and did not end until after the senior women had retired. You learned when to speak and when to become furniture. You learned which eunuchs reported to which administrators and which administrators reported directly to the Kisla, Agasa, the chief black eunuch, the harem's operational director, the man whose approval determined whether your rank moved upward or whether you disappeared into the lower corridors and were never spoken of again. Girls who resisted the language instruction were not beaten, they were simply not promoted. In a system where rank determined food quality, sleeping quarters and physical safety, non-promotion was its own form of violence, quieter, cleaner, and leaving no marks the Venetian Senate could document. The harem operated on 6 ranked tiers, a semi at the bottom, then Kariai general attendant, then Usta senior attendant, then Iqbal, a sultan's recognised favourite, then Haseki chief consort, then Valide Sultan, mother of the reigning sultan, the apex. Each rank carried a documented daily stipend recorded in Akte. Each promotion required sign-off from the Kuzla Agasi, who answered only to the sultan. The Ottoman Imperial Harem registers, Harem Defterleri, still held in the Topkapi Palace Museum archives, recorded every woman's rank, stipend and quarter assignment with the administrative precision of a military payroll office. No birth names, no origins, no families. Just the name the system gave you, the rank the system assigned you, and the salary the system decided you had earned. Nurbanu spent years inside this, not weeks. The education was total and deliberate. Ottoman Turkish first, then Arabic, then Persian, calligraphy, Quran recitation, music, specific instruments considered appropriate to her station, embroidery, court protocol, down to the precise angle of deference owed to each rank above her. She learned which gardens she could enter and which were forbidden, which corridors required her eyes downward, which women could have her reassigned to lower quarters with a single word to the right eunuch. There is something worth sitting with here before the political ascent begins. Nurbanu was, by every account that survives, genuinely brilliant. The languages came fast. The political instincts were sharp. She was not merely surviving the system. She was mastering it, in the way that extraordinarily capable people master whatever environment they are placed inside. And that is precisely where the horror becomes hardest to hold. Because every skill she built was also a brick in the wall between herself and the girl on the dock at Paros. Every competency was a further distance from Cecilia. The system was not breaking her, it was completing her, and she was helping. She caught the attention of Sheshzad Selim, Suleiman the Magnificent's son, the future sultan. She was elevated from Asimi to Iqbal, her stipend increased. In 1546, she gave birth to Selim's first son, Murad. That biological event reclassified her instantly. The mother of a potential heir occupied a category the register had no adequate column for. Untouchable, indispensable, now genuinely dangerous to anyone who moved against her. But Nurbanu's path was not the only one the harem was running simultaneously. While she was ascending, the same pipeline was processing dozens of others. And what happened to the ones who didn't rise, or who rose and then fell, is the part of the harem story that the biographical focus on Nurbanu has always obscured. The surveillance inside the harem was total. Eunuch informants reported conversations. Senior women monitored junior women for signs of independent alliance building, meaning any relationship formed without administrative sanction. Girl who was found passing notes to a woman above her station without permission could be demoted to Karai and assigned to corridor cleaning. A girl who was found attempting contact with the outside world, a letter smuggled out, a message passed to a visiting tradesman, faced consequences. The court records describe only as removal from the register. What that meant physically is left unspecified. The ambiguity was deliberate. The threat did not need to be precise to function. It only needed to be present. One detail from the harem defterleri captures this with a bureaucratic chill that no dramatic language can improve. Some register entries simply end. A name appears across multiple salary records, rank progressions documented, stipend increases noted, and then nothing. No death record, no expulsion note, no transfer document. The entry stops. The column goes blank. The register moves to the next name as if the previous one had never existed. Cecilia had seen what happened to girls who stopped appearing in the register. She had learned, in the way you learn things inside institutions that do not announce their rules directly, that visibility required compliance and compliance required transformation. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent was aging. When he died, Selim's brothers would fight for the throne, and in the Ottoman succession, the losers and their mothers were executed by silk bowstring before the new sultan's first week was finished. Nurbanu had one son, one chance, and she had spent a decade learning exactly how this system disposed of women who ran out of uses. Suleiman died in September 1566. Hungary, on campaign far from Constantinople, his body kept secret for 11 days, while couriers rode to ensure Selim reached the capital before his brothers could mobilize. The secrecy was not grief, it was logistics. In the Ottoman succession, the first prince to reach the throne room was the Sultan. The others were corpses within the week. Selim the Suan took the throne. His brothers were strangled the same night. Not metaphorically, not politically. The silk bowstring was an Ottoman administrative tool as standardized as the register itself. Mehmed II had codified fratricidal succession into law in the previous century, explicitly in writing. The execution of rival princes was legally sanctioned to prevent civil war. The calculus was cold and not irrational. One dead prince cost less than a fractured empire. The brothers' mothers were expelled from the palace before dawn. Their register entries were closed. Nurbanu's was updated Haseki, chief consort, stipend increased, quarters reassigned to the senior wing, then 1574. Selim too died of injuries sustained, and this detail the court historians recorded with visible discomfort. By falling in his bath after a prolonged drinking session, her son Murad III became sultan. Nurbanu became Valide Sultan, the same bureaucratic system that had recorded her purchase at 3 akshay per day now executed her commands. She controlled harem appointments, She approved and blocked Grand Vizier nominations. 4 confirmed interventions between 1574 and 1580, documented in Ottoman court records. She managed diplomatic correspondence with Venice directly, bypassing formal channels in ways that made Venetian ambassadors simultaneously grateful and deeply unsettled. Personal fortune reached into the millions of axe. According to dispatches filed by Venetian bailo Andrea Badoa with the Senate in 1573, Venice was actively cultivating her as a political asset before Selim had even died, sending Murano glass, bolts of silk, personal letters, because they understood that her intervention in Ottoman policy was worth more than any formal treaty they could negotiate. Venice never asked for her back. Pause on that. The republic that watched Barbarossa's fleet work through the Aegean in 1537 and take 15,000 people off islands they nominally controlled, that had ambassadors, treaties, naval capacity, looked at the most powerful woman in the Ottoman Empire and calculated that demanding her return would end the asset. So they sent her glass. They wrote her letters in Venetian Italian, they called it statecraft, and filed it under diplomatic relations, not under the name of a girl they had failed to protect on a burning island 40 years earlier. But here is where the biographical focus on Nurbanu has always committed its central error. Her story is extraordinary. It is also not singular. The pipeline that processed Cecilia into Nurbanu was running simultaneously on dozens of other girls. And some of their stories survived in fragments that make Nurbanu's ascent look almost gentle by comparison. Safiye Sultan, likely Albanian, possibly Venetian. The records conflict, and the conflict is itself revealing, because the system that erased origins was also the system tasked with reconstructing them when politically convenient. Safiye entered the harem as a slave girl and became the Haseki of Murad III, Nurbanu's own son, which means Nurbanu and Safiye, 2 enslaved foreign-born women, won the other's captor in everything but name, spent years in direct political competition inside the same 4 walls. Safiye eventually became Valide Sultan in 1595. Her birth name does not appear in any Ottoman document. Kösem Sultan, Greek, captured young, origin island unspecified in surviving records, entered the harem of Ahmed Davist around 1604. She rose to become the most politically active Valide Sultan in Ottoman history, governing as regent for not 1 but 2 of her sons, Murad Afoy and Ibrahim I. She was strangled in 1651 by a faction loyal to her own daughter-in-law, inside the harem, in a corridor she had walked for 40 years. The register recorded her death. It did not record her Greek name. It had never known it. Handan Sultan, Bosnian, mother of Ahmed I, her entry into the harem is documented. Her capture is not. She died in 1605, possibly of grief following her son's illness. The court records are ambiguous in ways that suggest the ambiguity was intentional. Her birth name, unrecorded. Her rank at death, Valide Sultan. The register gave her a complete institutional biography and a total personal erasure simultaneously, which was, by this point, simply standard procedure. 3 women, 3 different origins, 3 different decades, the same outcome every time. Not because the system got lucky, but because the system was specifically engineered to produce this outcome. The empire did not want mothers of sultans who had external loyalties. It wanted women who had been so completely remade that loyalty to the Ottoman throne was the only loyalty remaining. The most efficient way to manufacture that loyalty was to ensure that the person who might have felt differently, the Greek girl, the Bosnian girl, the Albanian girl, the Venetian girl on the dock at Paros, no longer existed in any document, any record, any archive anywhere on Earth. The register didn't just erase names. It erased the possibility of return. A woman with no documented origin has no homeland to go back to, no family to claim her, no legal identity outside the system that holds her. The erasure in the ledger was not symbolic. It was structural. It was the lock on the door, disguised as paperwork. And in the final year of her life, the woman who had navigated all of this, who had outlasted brothers, rivals, grand viziers, and a husband who died in his bath, made one decision that the register, for all its precision, could not have anticipated. She picked up a pen, and she wrote herself into stone. The Atik Valide Mosque complex in Üsküdar was designed by Mimar Sinan, the imperial architect who built the Süleymaniye, the Selimiye, and more of the physical Ottoman world than any other human being in recorded history. Nurbanu commissioned it from her personal waqf, her endowment, funded entirely from a fortune she had accumulated across 4 decades of operating inside a system that had purchased her for 3 akçe a day. The complex was not modest: a mosque, a madrasa, a hospital, a a soup kitchen, a caravanserai, a Quran school, one of the largest Ottoman mosque complexes ever constructed by a single patron. The endowment deed still exists. It lists the properties, the revenues, the administrative structures that would sustain the complex after her death. Scholars have read it. Tourists photograph the mosque. The deed is thorough and precise. Her name on that deed, Nurbanu Valide Sultan, nowhere in the endowment, nowhere in the mosque's foundation inscription, nowhere in any Ottoman document ever produced in the entire span of her life does the name Cecilia Venier-Baffo appear. She built the largest monument of her existence, in the name a palace Eunice assigned her on a dock in Constantinople when she was 12 years old. 500 years of daily prayers have been offered inside those walls under that name. The building will likely outlast every archive that holds her register entry. The erasure she suffered in 1537 has now been consecrated in stone, in marble, in a structure engineered to survive centuries. This is the moment the central motif completes its full rotation. The register entry that murdered Cecilia's identity in 1537, that thin line of ink recording a stipend, a rank, a new name with no column for origin, that same register system now surrounds her in every direction. It is the mosque, it is the deed, it is the court record noting 3 days of official mourning when she died on December 7, 1583. It is the entry in the Sultan's personal chronicle recording that Murad the Thrower wept publicly, that the empire paused, that she was buried in the turb of Selim the Singh at Hagia Sophia with full imperial honours. All of it recorded, all of it preserved, all of it under a name she did not choose, in a religion she did not choose, in a city she was brought to in chains. The system did not fail to honour her. That is what makes this so difficult to look at directly. The system honoured her completely, and in doing so, completed the erasure completely. The honours and the erasure were the same act. Nurbanu died at approximately 58 years old. She had spent 46 of those years inside the Ottoman institution, longer inside than outside, by a margin that kept growing from the moment the galley left Paros. Her death was recorded in the same register system that had recorded her purchase. The entry was filed with full imperial honours, every rank progression noted, the stipend history complete. A thorough document, a total disappearance. Within hours of that filing, the harem was already reorganising. Safiye Sultan, the Albanian or Venetian girl who had spent years in political competition with Nurbanu inside those same walls, moved to consolidate her position with Murad III. New alliances, new eunuch loyalties, new register entries updated, new stipends reassigned, new women elevated and demoted in the overnight arithmetic of harem succession. The pipeline did not pause. It had never paused. It was already processing the generation that would produce Kösem, who would govern for 40 years, and die strangled in a corridor, and Handan, who would not survive her son's illness, and a dozen others whose names the registers recorded and whose birth names the registers never knew. Power did not mean freedom. This requires saying again, plainly, because the assent tends to swallow it. Not one of these women, not Nurbanu, not Safiye, not Kösem, not Handan, ever left voluntarily. The Valide Sultan governed one of the largest empires on earth from behind latticed windows. She never walked through Constantinople as a free woman. The city she administered from a distance she was never permitted to simply move through. The courtyards she managed, she had memorised in the dark because she had no other geography. The political power was real, documented, consequential, and exercised entirely from inside a locked institution that she had entered as cargo. There is one detail from the final years that the Ottoman court chroniclers recorded, without comment, as though it required none. Nurbanu corresponded with the Doge of Venice in Venetian Italian. 46 years after her capture, 46 years after her conversion, her renaming, her systematic replacement, the language was still there. The first language, the one laid down before the harem's education began, the one that predated every Ottoman word she had learned, had not been reached by the register. It had survived in whatever part of a person survives the paperwork. She wrote to Venice in the language of a girl who no longer existed in any document. Venice wrote back in the same language and called it diplomacy, and never once put the word Cecilia in the reply. The Venetian Senate's response to Nurbanu's death was filed in the Archivio di Stato di Venezia under diplomatic correspondence, not under citizen records. The entry acknowledged the loss of a favourable contact at the Ottoman court. No mention of a lost citizen, no mourning for Cecilia. The republic that failed to protect a 12-year-old girl on a burning Aegean island in 1537 documented her 46 years of captivity, her political dominance, and her death in the same administrative category, operational intelligence. She had been useful, now she was not. The file was closed. This is the verdict the historical record delivers without dramatics, without editorial commentary, without anyone in the archive apparently finding it remarkable. A sovereign European state maintained a covert political relationship with one of its own kidnapped citizens for over a decade, leveraged her influence over Ottoman foreign policy, sent her gifts to maintain the relationship, and upon her death classified the entire episode as a diplomatic asset going offline. The word Cecilia does not appear in that file. It does not appear in any file. The Senate of Venice, which kept meticulous records of everything, kept no record of her original name, because keeping that record would have required acknowledging what they had allowed to happen to her. And acknowledging that would have cost them the asset. The numbers complete the picture that the individual stories can only partially show. During the Sultanate of Women, roughly 1533 to 1656, at least 6 valid sultans governed the Ottoman Empire's domestic affairs. All were enslaved foreign-born women. Combined, they influenced Ottoman policy for over 120 years. 120 years of the most powerful empire in the world, administered at its domestic core by women who had been systematically stripped of every identity they were born with. The harem register system was not peripheral to Ottoman power, it was load-bearing, and it was constructed entirely on a foundation of names that were entered in one column and never entered anywhere else. Nurbanu's register entry still exists in the Topkapi Palace Museum archives. Catalogued under the Harem Defterleri, cross-referenced with salary registers D2774 and D9706. Her stipend entry, 3 acts, her final stipend as Valide Sultan, documented, her rank progressions complete, her assigned name at each stage. What you were 17, recorded with bureaucratic precision, a total institutional biography of a woman who lived 58 years and was never once recorded as the person she was before the galley docked. The mosque still stands. The baptismal record does not. History buried this under 2 layers of distortion that served opposite audiences and arrived at identical conclusions. Western Orientalists, Ingres, Jerome, 100 painters who had never approached Topkapi, produced images of languid women in marble baths, passive bodies arranged beneath silk curtains for a gaze that was always from the outside. Those paintings did not misrepresent the harem accidentally. They replaced a political institution with an erotic fantasy, because the fantasy was easier to sell, and more importantly, because the fantasy made the institution's actual function invisible. If the harem was a pleasure garden, there was no system to examine. There were only women who had been lucky enough to be chosen. Ottoman court historians ran the inverse operation. They recorded the Valide sultans as wise and naturally ascendant mother figures, their origins softened into irrelevance, their captures unmentioned, their renames unremarked upon. Nurbanu Sultan, beloved consort of Selim, architectural patron, devoted mother of Murad III. The wrist being grabbed at Paros was not mentioned, galley hold was not mentioned. The cross lifted from her neck without ceremony was not mentioned. Both distortions, the European fantasy and the Ottoman glorification, served the same structural purpose. They made the process disappear by making the product seem inevitable. If she was always Nurbanu, there was no Cecilia to account for. Today, the Atik Valide Mosque in Üsküdar is a functioning place of worship. Tourists photograph it from the Bosphorus ferry. Guidebooks credit it to Nurbanu Sultan, wife of Selim II, patron of Mimar Sinan. No guidebook mentions Paros. No guidebook mentions the galley. No guidebook mentions that the woman who endowed this mosque was taken from her bed at 12 years old, carried across the Aegean in a hold that smelled of urine and salt, examined by physicians who assessed her teeth and hands for market value, given a name she did not choose, converted to a religion she was not asked about, and kept inside 4 walls for 46 years, while the city she administered from a distance moved through its days outside her window. The register won. It won because it was never dramatic. It never raised a sword or burned a village or did anything that required justification. It simply opened to a clean page, entered a new name in a fresh column, and let time do the arithmetic. 46 years, the girl from the Aegean became the woman on the throne, and the distance between those 2 identities is the exact width of a line in a ledger. Not a chasm, not a transformation, a line, drawn in ink by a clerk who did not know her name and was not required to ask. Cecilia Venier-Baffo's name appears in no Ottoman document. Nurbanu Sultan's name appears in hundreds. The system did not kill her, it replaced her. It replaced her so completely, so precisely, so permanently, that the precisely, so per mosque, that has been standing 4th century, 5 centuries. And the mosque will be there long after every scholar who named Cecilia has also been forgotten. The system called the replacement a promotion. The register called it a rank update. Venice called it a diplomatic contact. History called it the Sultanate of Women. Nobody called it what it was. How many names are written in those registers? How many names were erased to write them? Nurbanu's pipeline had a male counterpart, older, larger, and it didn't build consorts. It built an army that held Europe in terror for 300 years, one kidnapped Christian boy at a time.